Hi, Nikki Fletcher again, and in this video I want to tell you a little tiny bit more about myself and the journey that Andrew, my husband, and I have had to date. Where to start? Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that we celebrated our 12th wedding anniversary 2 days ago. We got married in 2005. And when we got married, we were really hopeful for the future, especially surrounding having children, because a couple of years earlier we'd experienced a split condom incident and I had become pregnant. And that lulled us into a false sense of security. You know, basically, my eggs only had to smell sperm and that was it, I was going to be pregnant. So a couple of years later we got married. We decided to wait until after the wedding before we started to try to conceive. Partly that was because we didn't think there was a problem. You know, I'd had this unexpected pregnancy when we weren't actively trying to conceive. So yeah, we thought it was going to be pretty easy. And the other thing is that we realised pretty soon into the planning stages of the wedding that 5 of my girlfriends were going to be pregnant during the wedding. Some of them were actually quite heavily pregnant. There was a chance that the mother of my sort of eldest bridesmaid wasn't going to make it because the due date was the date of our wedding. And I thought, do you know what, I really can't cope with being hormonal and suffering from morning sickness at the same time as trying to make sure that you know, they were being looked after as well. So anyway, we decided to wait. We went on honeymoon. The end of the honeymoon, you know, my cycle was, I think I was running at about day 32, 33 by the time we got on the plane to fly home. So we thought, oh, fantastic, because I had at that stage a very, very regular cycle. You know, 27 days and almost to the hour I knew when I was going to start my period. So to be sort of 31, 32, 33 days into a cycle, that was very... it was very likely I was pregnant. The only time it had ever happened before was when I'd fallen pregnant after the split condom. Anyway, we flew back to the UK and literally between the airport and going to somewhere to buy a pregnancy test, I started my period. I was thinking, oh, okay, yeah, a bit of a shame, but that's probably just the plumbing getting, you know, doing a test run, if you like. So we were again still very hopeful for the future. That was in the May time. In December, around Christmas time, I had one of these very unusual late periods. And again, just before we went to the shops to buy a pregnancy test, I started to have a period. So we decided at that stage to go and talk to our GP. And normally, you know, she actually told this, she said normally when you've only been actively trying to conceive for sort of 6 months, we'd say you go back and come back in another year and a half's time after you've been trying for 2 years. However, I had been charting. So I'd been taking my waking temperature every day. And also I had been checking the quality, consistency, colour, etc. of my vaginal fluids at that time. So she looked at all of this information and she says, right, okay, I can see that this is somebody who is really serious about what they're trying to do. They're being very proactive. She knows very accurately when she is at her most fertile, and they're coinciding their sex with that time. So she thought it was worthwhile doing a few tests, and it came back that I had low FSH, LSH I think it is, I get confused with the letters, they're all quite the same. One thing led to another, and I, after being referred to a specialist clinic, I went on a course of Clomid. And my levels went up threefold during that time. You know, I'd hadn't been ovulating beforehand. I had been on the Clomid, and yet again I had another of these very long periods. And yet again it coincided with a time when I couldn't actually get to buy a pregnancy test, and also we wanted to do the test together, and I was away from home at the time. And yet again, by the time I got home, my period had started. So yeah, the Clomid finished, and it was a case of, right, okay, we'll just do whatever we can. We'll carry on with the charting, and we'll see what happened. And actually, very little happened then until the morning of my 40th birthday. 3 a.m. I'd been 40, technically speaking, for 3 hours, and I woke up in screaming agony. We were in the Bahamas at the time, celebrating my 40th birthday, and I was beside myself. I'd never been in such pain before. And I looked at the diary, and I thought, hang on a minute, this is the day I'm meant to be ovulating. Because we'd actually planned the trip so that, maximising our chance of conceiving, being in a romantic place. We'd bought a plot of land in the Bahamas, so it was going to be where we were going to live in the future. So, everything we felt was aligned for this to be the month. And I woke up with severe pain on my left-hand side. And because I'd been charting for a couple of years by that time, I knew that it was about the place where my left ovary was. Anyway, we found out that the pain wasn't life-threatening, etc. It could wait until I got back home. Saw my GP. They referred me to see a gynaecologist who did some scans, ran a blood test, discovered that I'd got endometriosis, booked me in to have surgery. That took, it was actually quite quick. I think that was about 7 or 8 months since I woke up in pain. Actually a bit less than that, probably just over 6 months. Anyway, went into hospital, had them write in 50 million places all over my notes, this woman wants to get pregnant, so that even though I'd signed the waiver which said, in a case of emergency, I agree to you removing my womb, that they knew that it really had to be a dire emergency. Came round from the anaesthetic, was feeling a bit groggy, but nothing major. Angie came in and saw me, and I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, normally at this stage you have a nurse coming and checking your vital signs, etc. Every sort of 30 minutes, and that's not happened. So we asked somebody, and they said, somebody will be around to talk to you in a moment. Well, that moment sort of dragged on for probably about another hour, and eventually somebody did come around and say, really sorry to have to tell you this, Mrs. Fletcher, but when we opened you up, we were actually horrified by the number of adhesions that you had got, and knowing that you want to conceive in the future, we decided the best course of options was to sort of not proceed, discuss things with you, and possibly refer you to a centre of excellence. So that's what happened. I had lots of surgery. A couple of months later, it happened actually very quickly. About 3 months later, I think it was, I had about 4.5 hours of laser surgery, and was referred immediately after that to an IVF clinic. Had a cycle of IVF, one cycle of IVF, which was so catastrophically disastrous that basically we were told there was no point in doing another cycle unless we used donor eggs. Which we would have considered, it just wasn't an option at the time. So I was like, right, okay, back to getting on with life, I suppose. 3 years later, I suddenly had a missed period again. Actually, I think it was about three years, certainly no more than 4 years later. Anyway, I suddenly had a missed period, and this time, my period didn't start. So I was, I don't believe it, this might actually be happening. So we bought a pregnancy test, and we did the test, and there was nothing. So we thought, perhaps it's just very faint and we haven't left it enough time. So we waited a few more days and bought another pregnancy test. and that came back as negative as well. So we waited another week and we did another pregnancy test, and that came back as negative. And it's a case of, what on earth is going on here? And we were starting to get a little bit concerned because Andrew, with his first wife, had a son who had some very severe disabilities. He was born without the hypothalamus, which is basically the little bit at the back of your brain which controls everything. So it controls your growth, your hormones, etc. And it was a sort of a 1 in a million chance of that ever happening, but he was told if he had another child of Alison, that would then go down to sort of about 1 in 200, 1 in 250. Angus unfortunately died when he was 7 years old. Andrew and Alison split up, time passed, we met, we married, etc. And the doctor had reassured us that actually this was when I did have that pregnancy, he reassured us that no, we were back to the sort of 1 in a million chance. However, he would recommend doing as many tests as possible as soon as possible. So we're at this stage where I've not had a period. I'm usually 27 days and that is it, regular as clockwork. And now here I am at sort of 40 days and I still haven't had a period yet. So I go to the doctor and I explain the situation and they run a blood test and it comes back and says, sorry, Mrs. Fletcher, you're not pregnant. I said, yeah, but you, hang on a minute. And I explained the situation, and unfortunately it was a new doctor as well, so didn't know all of my sort of background history. I asked for another blood test to be done, and that came back as, no, you're definitely not. You're probably going through the menopause. And I said, no, I'm not. Honestly, I'm not. I went and saw another GP. I think actually I saw 2 GPs at the same surgery because I was so concerned. And they all just said, sorry, Mrs. Fletcher, you're not pregnant. Looking at your age, it's probably you're starting the menopause. And they wouldn't believe me that I wasn't going into the menopause. So eventually I ended up having a private scan. And no, I wasn't pregnant, but it wasn't the menopause either. And in fact, the GP went as white as a sheet when I showed him the report because of the number of cysts I had over my ovaries and the hint of adhesions I had. So he asked me to wait in the waiting room. He got on to the local hospital, talked to the senior gynaecologist there, and got me an appointment for an emergency hospital appointment later in that week, which he could give me before I left the surgery. And he was so apologetic because I imagine that he thought that there were possible lawsuits in the pipeline. Anyway, time passed, had that appointment, booked in for surgery, and exactly the same thing happened again. It's a case of they looked inside me and went, oh, we're not dealing with this. So they referred me to a centre of excellence again. And that time, when I had the surgery that time, afterwards they said, we strongly recommend that you actually go onto the pill because we think that by not having a monthly cycle, we can slow down the rate that your body produces these adhesions, because my body obviously has a habit of hiding symptoms. They said that with the number of adhesions and the state of my pelvis, basically my pelvis was totally stuck together. It was one of the worst cases they'd ever seen. They said that there should have been more symptoms. It shouldn't have just been that my period stopped. So they wanted to sort of try and give my body a bit of a rest, etc. So that's where we were up to, that was just over 4 years ago I had that second surgery. And after that, we just got on with life. We didn't realise we had to grieve, and it was only about 2 years ago that I actually started thinking about what had happened. And as you can see, it's still work in progress. But this is actually quite a good example of what it's like for people in our situation. You know, we can be going along and we can be talking about it, and everybody thinks, oh, we're absolutely fine. And then something suddenly hits you. So, I'm going to stop there and say, well, actually, no, I'm just going to stop there and say, I'll see you in the future next time.